So this is a work session of the Portland City Council. Today is March 3rd, 2020. This is a work session on the Portland building reconstruction. The Portland building is famous for its architecture and, of course, for Portlandia. And no, I do not mean the television show. I mean the iconic statue that greets people walking by on Fifth Avenue. It's also the workplace for more than 1,700 of our City of Portland employees, and it's the front door for thousands of Portland residents who do business with the city. This month, we celebrate a major milestone, reopening the building after a 2-year reconstruction project. As you'll recall, the City Council directed this transformation back in 2015 to address a number of issues, predominantly structural, seismic, and water concerns. The project also presented an opportunity to become more sustainable, advance our equity goals, improve customer service, and enhance workplace recruitment and retention. Today, we're going to hear an overview of the Portland building reconstruction from our Chief Administrative Officer, Tom Reinhardt, and our project lead, Kristen Wells. They've agreed to update us on the project itself, as well as some of the lessons learned. So this is all very exciting. We'll let you take it from there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council, good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm very excited and proud to be here with our project lead, Kristen Wells.
Is this you excited, Tom?
This is me excited. I'm getting warmed up, Commissioner.
Okay.
Just let me get into it a little.
He starts off
checking.
slow and then he
If
builds.
by slide
He
4
builds.
I'm not more animated, please break in. Good morning to you, Commissioner. I appreciate
morning.
the energy. The purpose of today's session is to walk you through what we think is a highly successful project and some lessons learned in terms of with the way the city can apply some of the learning to other major initiatives that all of you and your colleagues will be working on with us over the next few years, and to be honest about some challenges ahead with the building. So that is our intent today. We do not anticipate it will take a full hour unless you get as animated as I will be, which we don't know if that will happen. Again, successes, lessons learned, and challenges ahead. And with that, I'll pass it to Kristen to start doing the regrounding for us on why we did this project in the first place. You want to give me green? There you go.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So I'm going to talk just a little bit about why did we reconstruct this project in the first place. As you mentioned, Mayor, in 2015, Council directed us to reconstruct the building. It had a history of water leaks and infiltration issues that was causing degradation to the exterior and the interior of the building. The mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems were near the end of their useful life and needing to be revived. And then the building was originally built in the early 80s prior to the seismic codes that were implemented in the mid-1990s. And so the city had a desire to improve the seismicity of the building. We looked at multiple options at that time prior to deciding to do the project, including tearing the building down and reconstructing a new building in its place, selling the building and moving to a different location, or what we ultimately decided, which was to keep the building and do the major reconstruction project. Council directed the project team and OMF to complete the project for no more than $195 million and to be complete by the end of 2020. The scope included fixing all the issues I previously mentioned, but it also provided us an opportunity to improve the workplace and upgrade the building for accessibility and technology that was behind the times. We also had the goals to meet the green building policies, to maintain the historic integrity of the building, and to improve and create a quality workplace for the 1,332 employees that at that time worked in the building. Next slide. Some of the successes that we've been able to achieve through the project include coming in a year ahead of schedule. We actually completed the substantial completion exactly 2 years after breaking ground. We're tracking under budget with very little to do yet on the project, and we're able to achieve additional scope items within that maximum budget. We've exceeded our workforce and construction contracting and equity goals, including all of the disaggregated goals for construction. We have an apprenticeship rate of 27% compared to our goal of 20%. Construction contracts came in at 33% compared to the city's goal of 22%, and the additional reach goal by Howard S. Wright of 3%, which put us at the 25% category. And design services came in at 27% compared to the initial goal of 22%. We've also gone beyond the green building policy. We're currently tracking to be right on the cusp of platinum, LEED platinum rather than the LEED gold that the green building policy directs us to. And we are applying to be the first certified well building in the city. The scope that we were directed to complete was fully executed, including standardizing and tenant improvements, the hardwall construction, the finishes, the mechanical, electrical, and technology upgrades. But we've also been able to get additional scope into the project within the budget that was initially given. That includes nearly $4.5 million of AV technology, significant improvements to the urban landscape, and a higher level of sustainability than initially planned for. Additional scope successes included integrated technology. We now have an integrated AV in all of our primary conference rooms throughout the entire building that is consistent and easy to use for all of the employees and the public that use the building.
Oh, good. Can we move over there?
Come on
Let's
over.
put a pin in that. Let's put a pin in that and come back to it.
Okay.
We also have a new
I hear
integrated.
Tom's office is nice.
We also have a new integrated security system that is an enterprise system. And we have coherent building management and flexible design throughout the building. The building also became an opportunity and a catalyst for change throughout the city.
What do you mean by that?
I will get into some of that.
Oh, okay, then I'll stop talking.
So one of the things we were able to do is create a welcoming front door. Tom had stated early in the project something to the effect of customers shouldn't have to know our structure to get their needs met. The public previously had to wander throughout the building to try to find which bureau they were trying to get services from, and often were moved from one floor to another trying to find the right department. We now have a unified customer service at the front entry, which provides better equity to our public, creating less confusing services for the public, and being able to get their needs met quickly and efficiently in one place. We also have a new service of event and conferencing that we previously have not had to offer at the city. We have a front room that we can offer various events and a great place for the public to come, and a conferencing center on the second floor. With that, I'll turn it over to Tom to talk about additional improvements.
Thanks, Kristen. So any project of this scope and scale presents lots of different opportunities to do more. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about in lessons learned I want to allude to now, and that is the fact that the previous council assigned this project to the chief administrative officer, I think is significant, and I want to talk about it a little bit. Sometimes these projects in the city are assigned to a facilities director or an individual bureau, and you lose the opportunity to take on additional opportunities as they arise. The fact that the previous CAO, Fred Miller, was given really specifically 2 charges for this project, finish by the end of 2020 and spend not more than a dime, over $195 million, I think is a great learning for the city, because the fact that the CAO had all the purview over the budget, but could also propose to council additional ways to use the project that a facilities director or a manager within the organization wouldn't have had the ability to do through their role, I think is a real learning that we should apply. So I want to go through some of those that we did take advantage of in this project and talk to you about ways I think we can use this model in the future. So first and foremost, you've heard the numbers approximately 1,300 and then 1,700. The fact that we are going to have 1,700 employees in this building is a major win for the city. The original scope of the project called for 1,300 employees to move out and move back in. That was with the assumption that in a reconstruct, we were going to move all the old furniture in, let everybody move their printers and outdated AV equipment back in. When I was transitioning into the role, I did a series of meetings and decided it was worth proposing to council that we not repeat the mistakes of the past, and that we modernize the building and create a 21st century building that's a 50-year building, and not rue the mistakes that we were heading into, which is letting everybody move all their old stuff in, for lack of a better term. So we brought the space optimization project to council. They approved a separate project to buy all new furniture, which was totally interchangeable. We can move people out of that building next month and move a new set of people in. We wouldn't have to buy anything new. It's the first time we used a single furniture vendor in the city of Portland, so the economies of scale and the savings on that. We are still tracking on saving $25 million over the next 20 years because of space optimization. The short of it is we're getting 400 more people in that building. We're canceling out leases, and we're using the building as the real municipal center, and we're going to save a lot of money instead of renting space in the downtown core.
So, Tom, can I stop you there for a
Yes,
second?
I'm getting excited, though.
I know, I can see the excitement building. So how would you respond? So we've gone from 1,332 employees to 1,700. Workers may be concerned that they're going to be packed in like sardines, and is that something we should be worried about?
It's a great question. Kristen and I have teamed up on, I think at last count, 37 information sessions with employees.
Wow.
We consistently get this question. We have not heard yet that people feel crowded in the building, although we are still completing our last moves. I anticipate that we will continue to have people that will have to adjust to a smaller individual workspace, and we've been honest with people about now there are several places to do your job in the building. The 15th floor, which is a shared employee space, a number of shared spaces and different rooms to go to. It is requiring people to adjust that they don't have a single space that they do all their work in during their working hours. And it's requiring us to be flexible. The mayor alluded to an office that I have. I actually have a freestanding workstation because I thought it was important to model this for employees, and a number of other people throughout the organization are doing that. And I'm finding it very easy to do the different work that I need to do in different places. I want to be clear, though, for the engineers and others working that have a completely different scope in terms of their responsibilities, we do anticipate that we may need to make some adjustments, and we reserve some of the budget in terms of after a settling in period, that as we study this and get feedback through surveys and other means, we will be reasonable about any adjustments we need to make. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And let me just say, I greatly appreciate the forethought to think maybe we don't have it perfect yet, but we will have an opportunity to continue to change it to accommodate the needs of the workers. I really appreciate hearing you say that.
Yeah. So just a couple more things on the opportunities and additional improvements list. Kristen mentioned the infusion of technology and common AV, audiovisual throughout the building. We think it's very important that whether or not you're on the transportation floor or the water floor, that you can go wherever in the building, plug in your laptop, you can use whatever conference area or shared room that you can access. We also think it's important from a resident perspective that when they're using the floors on the first and second floor, that it's easy, that anyone can plug in, and it's not a mystery of how to use the technology. We also thought that it was really important to make it a space that people want to work in, and we're already hearing from people in different workspaces, much like the joke earlier, when can we move in? And to tell you the truth, a lot of these are folks that were not expressing any interest in the Portland building during the design process. So it's good for us that we've now upped our game, and that's going to present some challenges as we need to improve other workspaces as well. Any questions on additional improvements before I move forward? Okay. So I touched on the foundations for success because I think it's critical that we springboard from this in terms of how we manage other large-scale projects. We learned a little bit. We applied some of this on the online permitting system success that we just had, but I want to walk through it because you, as our governing body and council members, are going to be faced with other large-scale, complex, multi-bureau, thorny projects over the next few years, and we embrace doing them with you, but we have some common learning that we want to emphasize. Like I mentioned, this had a very clear and well-defined governance model. I don't think there'll be much argument that if I had to bring hundreds of decisions to the elected officials, that this would have been a more difficult project. I did not. Kristen and the team were very wise about what our lines were, but the decisions that I had to make, some of them that weren't popular, really helped in terms of keeping this on time and on budget. And I think that's just the reality of the world we live in, and we should be cognizant of that on projects in the future. I expect you to hold me accountable to any mistakes I made, but the governance lines were clear, and I hope the reporting and the updates that we gave you were sufficient. We had experienced and highly committed oversight. Each of the council members that were sitting on city council when this project started assigned a Portland Building Community Oversight Committee member. Those folks were highly prepared for every meeting. Between meetings, they called me when they needed to get questions answered. They pushed us very hard on scope, budget, and equity goals. It's not an overstatement to say that we would not have outperformed on equity if it wasn't for that oversight committee. They held our feet to the fire. Staff had to come in and report every month, and then staff left, and they talked with me about what they were happy about and what they weren't. I can't say thank you enough to them. They're a highly valued group, and I think we should apply that model in other projects. One thing I would say is that I don't think we did a great job in the transition to new council members around that link to the oversight committee. And so, and part of my reflection as the sponsor of this project is we could do a better job making sure, for example, when Commissioner Hardesty and Commissioner Daly came on to council, that we did a formal briefing with their oversight committee people.
Yeah, I didn't know I had a representative. I hope they were good.
You were well served. Okay. You were well served. But that's part of our onboarding and prep that I think Commissioner Hardesty would agree. We did about 80% of a good job in terms of the onboarding, and we're trying to get there in this next iteration when we're onboarding new council. Integrated project delivery model. We did a progressive design build team model to this project. We had our design folks, our general contractor, our city employees that were the lead, like under Kristen, and our owner's rep, all on one floor, working through decisions together, working through the design options together, troubleshooting together. They graded each other each month, and it was part of their own compensation structure that they graded each other. I learned a lot just watching them work. They resolved conflict in a very healthy way, and there was a lot of conflict. But as you'll see in a couple other slides, I think the fundamentally different approach is directly resulted in being ahead of time, on budget, coming up with a great design, and really the product speaks for itself. So I wanted to mention that we should be thinking about that. That's an evolution for the public sector. Most public sector jobs are not that integrated. And lastly, there's been a strong organizational commitment to change. No matter what your bureau portfolio is now, I want council to know the directors, the deputies, the change managers, the people assigned from the bureaus. Once we landed on a design together that folks agreed upon and supportive, they really held firm, and there was a lot of pressure. And they did a great job in terms of instigating and supporting and doing change management around all the different ways we are working now in that building. So thank you to everybody for that. Any questions before I move to lessons learned? I've laid some of the groundwork for them, but I'm just going to move unless Commissioner Daly, I know what it's like to be on the other line during a meeting, so I want to give you a chance to ask a question if you've got one. Okay. We learned a lot about equity in contracting and equity participation in workforce development that we want to talk about. And I know Commissioner Hardesty's already asked for a follow-up that we will do in terms of all the different firms that won bids and that analysis. Ask a question if you've got one.
I'm good, Tom. Thanks for asking.
Okay. Oh, sorry, I forget the delay there. It's like, you know,
Like four
a
times as long.
transatlantic call in the 1980s. Apologies for that. So the quality of the documents in terms of the design, build, reconstruct, the integrated team that I talked about, I've heard it at two different events with minority contractors that folks bid on this project because the way that we ran the process was so well integrated and the drawings were done so early and so tight that they felt like it was a good cost-benefit analysis for them to bid. And here's why. Oftentimes on public sector projects, contractors are forced to look at 2, 3, 4, multiple sets of drawings and bid each time. Mm-hmm. If you are a large firm, a lot easier to do. If you are a small firm, if you are an emerging contractor, it's much harder, and you're always judging, is this worth my time to put this together? So the fact that we were we were way ahead in terms of the final drawings, and there weren't going to be changes. Made it a lot easier for firms to bid, and it helped us achieve our goals, and it was better for people in the community. So that's a lesson I want to apply through procurement and with our other construction work.
And Tom, this was not a low bid contract when it started off. So you actually started off seeking people with expertise, and then you picked the contractor that you thought you would have the best success with. Would you talk a little about that process?
Please, I'm going to have Kristen respond to that.
Certainly. So we did what's called progressive design build. We hired the architect and the contractor at the same moment in time. We then went through a very quick process to get key trade partners on board prior to a single pencil drawing being done. Those partners signed up to be part of the meeting all of our equity goals as well. And so we did what some consider just-in-time bidding. So we did not hire contractors, the subcontractors and the sub-subcontractors until we were very near to needing that scope of work, which allowed us to have meetings with subcontractors ahead of time, familiarize them with the site, familiarize them with what they could expect, and it was not very far out in their planning, and our design was complete. The work that they needed to complete would be complete at that point in time. And so it was very clear to them what was expected and what was going into it, so the risk came down quite a bit. With a low bid or traditional approach, you have an entire set of documents. They're trying to pour over all of those documents, and a lot of changes happen throughout the construction process that they're then having to respond to.
Not to mention the time delay between the time they put in their first subcontractor bid and
Absolutely. It was a 2-year construction process. We would have bid it 4 to 6 months prior to construction, so some of those contractors wouldn't have been on site for up to 2.5 years after having put in a bid.
Thank you. That's really helpful because we've been having this conversation with procurement around some of their big contracts that they are moving forward. And so this is really going to be helpful, I think, as we move forward to really think about if we have equity goals, how do we make sure that we are centering that at the beginning of the contract rather than trying to figure out why we failed at the end. So thank you.
Building on that point, I want to make sure council knows that the more that we talk with contractors in the market, they know this is the expectation now. So Kristen touched on it earlier. Howard S. Wright actually in their bid increased the subcontracting and equity goals as a part of their bid. So the trend is clear. The message has been sent by this governing body and others that the expectations on this. We should continue to do everything we can to push and do more, but I think the market is responding around the expectation that this will improve and that they will be held accountable on their numbers. And that's testament to predecessors and other colleagues in the region. There have been a lot of good questions raised by this council, the Metro Council, Multnomah County Board of Commissioners on the ladder between apprentices and journey level workers. Commissioner Hardesty's been voicing that as well. We learned a couple things on this project, but have a ways to go. It's clearly a challenge for specific trades or very small workforce contracts to make sure this ladder is seamless. So we're hoping that our partnership with Metro, we can really dig into this as a region. How do we make sure we're tracking this project to project? We've had a couple large-scale public projects going on at the same time, basically competing for people, and there hasn't been a lot of thought put into where's their next job. Right. So if we're going to be serious about workforce development for women and people of color, we have to do better at that. I'm really happy with our numbers, and I'm worried what's going to happen next for people that have gotten their initial apprenticeship hours. So we will follow up with you on that. We're also going to do a written report in terms of our equity goals and what we've learned and what should happen over the next few years, and we will submit that to the council. Other learning that we did, we have some competing city policies that were interesting in this contract. With our
Almost never happens, right?
Right. So I'm smiling because it's a common challenge we have, right? So we had one example in which we had a contract that our general contractor had, I believe it was for sheet metal, that ended up being in conflict with our prime contractor development program, meaning we had one goal, and because a firm was participating in one program, it couldn't count towards our equity goals. So we have to figure that out because we want to encourage all of those goals to be met. Other lessons learned quickly. We want to take advantage of disruptions that we have across the city to modernize our practices. We took advantage of this. We had a bunch of cars parked in the basement of the Portland building for legacy reasons and sometimes reasons we didn't know why. We had an antiquated or non-existent security program. We now have a whole security center on the 3rd floor that has eyes and ears throughout the downtown in a pretty sophisticated way. Our facilities services, now led on the interim basis by Kristen, has really upped its game in terms of managing our contract with Relay, but meeting customer expectations with an actual occupancy agreement. What are we doing for bureaus? What is the standard? Why are they paying? Most entities have an occupancy agreement. We finally have them. So we're taking advantage of this to say past practices are not good enough. And you've been fully briefed on the 311 effort. So customer service, we decided if we're going to do all this, we're going to move people out. We're going to start with the Portland building. We're going to build it out. I wanted to continue hammering home the lesson in disruptive times, we should disrupt our own poor business practices. I'm sitting across from 2 elected officials who are insisting on that in public safety as well. So we're going to continue to apply those lessons, and I'm happy to continue helping with that. We also learned that decentralized communications in the city is a major challenge. So let me give you a little flavor of that. This project touched, as we mentioned, over 1,000 employees. It was highly disruptive in terms of moving people out, moving people back in. The continuity of operations went very well, but we had big issues early on with what do bureaus communicate, what does the project communicate. There are various opinions on that. And this is not to disparage anyone, but this is just human nature. Many people wanted to retain control over their individual communications, and then were surprised that employees weren't hearing certain things. So I think all of the elected officials in Portland City Council will understand this very well. Without a centralized communication strategy and approach, projects like this will face significant setbacks. We overcame them, but there were hurdles. And I was always surprised by what folks thought was going on in the project and what was actually going on in the project. And we need to get better at that. Lastly, and this is a segue to the final slide, the lack of appropriate operational funding and reserves for the building continues to put this gargantuan investment at risk. So council several years ago defined a clear policy for operations and maintenance for any new city park. We have a ways to go citywide on thinking about a discipline like that for other assets. Obviously, Portland Parks and Rec, much more of a forward-facing, well-known in the community set of services and needs. Portland building, historically not so much. So the risk that we have as leadership changes and elected officials changes that we won't have adequate reserves for technology, the actual building, services that we're doing through there. I don't know if Kristen probably has a list in her head, but there are pieces that we need to be thinking about with you so that in 15 years our successors don't say, built a great building and you and you didn't maintain it well, and what were you thinking? So I want to make sure that council understood that we will be, as we get to know the building over the first year of occupancy, we'll be coming at you with what we think the building's going to need. Furniture would be another example of that. We have new systems furniture, but we don't yet have a solid plan of how we're going to maintain that. Before we go to questions, I just want to reiterate, we have a lot of major initiatives ahead of us as a city. I would encourage all of us to continue talking about why this one went so well. It had its hiccups, but largely it's a major success. And I would love to replicate it in terms of the governance model and other projects that we have that the council wants to drive. Kristen, anything I left out before we go to questions? Okay. Questions from council?
I have a couple. And first of all, how are we going to institutionalize this knowledge? How are we going to apply these lessons to other projects that may happen well after we're here, Tom or Kristen? How do we make sure this becomes institutionalized in our thinking around large capital construction projects?
Yeah, we're debating this in terms of the final, quote unquote, final report. if you would encourage us, and I hope you would, to make that more expansive in terms of the lessons learned, we would embrace that. We're always cognizant that you have a lot to read. You get sent a lot of reports, including my monthly report on this project. And I'm not naive that you have a lot going on. So if that is useful for you, I think there are lessons in terms of institutionalizing this beyond even capital construction projects. I do think just the general governance and the way city bureaus pulled together on this could be applied in several ways. So if you want us to do that, I'll make sure that's in there, and I'll share drafts with your
I'll
execs.
say yes. I think it's going to be very helpful because, as the mayor said, we got to make sure that this wisdom isn't lost.
I'd like to see some sort of a playbook. It doesn't have to be done today, this week, or even this month, but before too much time goes on, I'd like to see a playbook established for this. So one of the areas of significant disagreement between what you're telling us versus what the auditor told the community about this project is around estimates and budgets. What do we now know, and what is the recommendation for the future? Because I think one of the most problematic things is to have City Hall being in an argument with each other about whether this was in fact a success or was not a success, whether it was in fact on budget or whether it was in fact over budget. It looks really confusing from the perspective of the public and sort of feeds into the narrative that we don't know what the heck we're doing.
Agreed.
So what is our learning here?
Well, part of the playbook that we would bring back to you is there's learning, like I mentioned, on communications that also touches on this issue. So the project literally had thousands of documents pre-finalization of scope. There has been some confusion back and forth with the auditor around, before scope was finalized, of course, the team was kicking around dozens and dozens of options for what's in and what's out of scope. That being said, we could do a better job in terms of what's draft, what isn't, on all these major projects. I think there was some confusion there, and the auditor is following best practices, and the team's following best practices on how to audit a project of this size and magnitude. So that is a lesson in terms of, while the team is doing its best with its head down and vetting every option, to be clear on where we're at in the process is critical, because I'm convinced, and doing my own due diligence on it, that by the time they finalized scope, they had looked responsibly at all the options, and the scope was 195 for the construction and with a limited number of things to do, which council approved. I also think there's a challenge in our governmental structure in terms of what I touched on was the CAO's role and the project sponsor's role. I brought a separate package of investments. My own learning on this is I could have been clearer on that around council. You have two options. You either change the scope of the project, or we more firmly communicate that you've added a whole different set of investment options that are disconnected from the project. I could have been clearer on that. I was new. There's no excuse for that, but there was a context to how that was going on. So while you approved a separate set of investments, the auditor's team interpreted that as it's still the project investment. We just have a friendly disagreement about that.
Okay, well, I'd like to have some clarity on this for future projects, because what's concerning me here is we asked you to be opportunistic in terms of thinking broadly about the enterprise. And I don't mean the Starship, I mean the city of Portland. And you were able to bring in several hundred more people into this facility through the investment in the space optimization program, which therefore reduces costs elsewhere, right?
Absolutely.
And we voted on that as a package. So in my personal opinion, I sort of have a third way here that's even different maybe than the way you're thinking or the way the auditor was thinking, which is if we agreed to an increase in expenditure for an add-on like space optimization, which I think is good for our employees, good for the enterprise, good for the taxpayers, good for the facility, the additional estimate of that project should have been added to the estimate of the cost of the building. If you're going to add those things together, it's not either or. You can't pick either or. It's either we agreed to increase the budget in order to get more value, or it's a completely separate thing in my book. So, maybe my learning on this is we know that large capital construction projects are going to be audited. There's no surprise. Therefore, there should be some process whereby whoever is the project sponsor, whoever is in charge, and the auditor agree on what the baseline is that we're going to be judged against. Because the idea that we go through effectively a 5-year-long process, and at the end, what it really turns out, the big learning for me is we didn't even agree on what the finish line was.
Right. Yeah,
And
there's
that
a
should have been
challenge.
agreed-
There's a
that should
challenge
have been
here
agreed
on
to in advance.
a changeover in administration and chief administrative officer and project sponsor. That's one learning here in terms
Yeah.
of transitions. And you are correct that delineation could have been clearer, and next time it should be. And anytime that I'm faced with a choice around, do I make a proposal to save $25 million for the city over 20 years, even if I'm going to take some hits for it, I'm going to propose
And
that.
this is my concern,
So,
is
yeah.
it will
Right.
if the status quo stands, it will disincentivize future generations of leaders from actually taking those opportunities that can either improve
good
our
point.
technology, improve our customer service, decrease our overall operating costs,
Right.
increase our efficiency. I don't want to put the brakes on innovation
Right.
just because we can't figure out and agree on what the finish line is.
Right.
And so I applaud the changes you made. I supported each and every one of them.
Yes,
And I
thank you.
think they
Thanks
were
to the whole council.
appropriate, thoughtful, and frankly, cost-effective investments.
I think the harder question for the city is how many projects that aren't at this size and scale or daily operations are we missing opportunities to do better because
Dang.
employees are disincentivized from
Yes.
taking risk?
Yes, they're terrified of taking
I
risks.
have a different role.
Yes.
And I always feel supported by council, and I know where my line is in terms of where I need to ask you for support. There are hundreds of people out there that, and I think Commissioner Hardesty was, saying it, they don't feel like they can take those risks. And I fear that because we don't establish these guidelines well and the governance lines well, that we are missing opportunities.
I think you're right on the money, Mayor. I think that that this is a model that, while gave us a lot of very positive outcomes, if we don't institutionalize it and make sure that people have the freedom to look for opportunities, because sometimes you just don't know what you don't know at the very beginning. And so when an opportunity comes up, if you're not feeling like you're supported by your leadership, then you're not going to put yourself out on a limb. I think the reason why you far exceeded the goals around equity and minority and women contracting, quite frankly, was because you did not start with the lowest bidder. There's been this battle in government that we think that we get the best bang because we go with the people that we pay the least amount of money to, which means those are the people with the tiniest margin, and they're going to pay their subcontractors a lot less because, again, we are going with the lowest bidder. I am very interested in looking at how we model contracting in a way that actually supports the city's values around making sure that that lots of communities are benefiting from these public dollars as compared to just a very small segment of our community. And I think what you've done here really shows that if we're intentional and if we have an oversight board that is holding folks accountable in the moment, not when it's all said and done, but in the moment, that we're able to do corrective action so that at the end of the day we get what it is we want. So I first want to just applaud the thoughtfulness. Tom, you've come to me at least 4 or 5 times over the last year, just giving me updates to let me know if something was going different than you thought. I greatly appreciate it. I always felt like I was in the loop, even though I wasn't here when it started. So as far as me, your communication was very well, and I greatly appreciate that. I do have very specific questions about the event and conference space that is for public use. Does that mean the public has to pay money to use it? And does it happen just 9 to 5, or does the public have access to it in the evening or on a weekend?
Thanks, Kristen.
That's a fantastic question. We are working on operationalizing exactly how to implement the event and conference center. During the 8 to 5 hours, we are giving priority to city work, to city needs. However, we are putting together a process in which the public may request rooms as well during the 8 to 5 period. After hours, we are working on what the actual costs are to the city and planning to pass those costs on to those that reserve those rooms for nonprofit and for other government entities. And then public, which are for-profit entities, may also reserve those spaces at more of a market rate. And so there's a rate recovery element to our budget that we're looking at. We have not yet finalized what that will be since we're just learning how to operate the building.
I guess I would just caution that all nonprofits aren't created equally. There are nonprofits, and then there are multi-gazillionaire nonprofits. And there are very small business owners as well as gazillionaire business owners. And so I would just hope that we would create a scale that would reflect the range of community members that may want access to that space. I would also hope that we would prioritize like youth groups and senior groups, because again, if you think about folks with no resources who need to gather, I think those would be my priority groups. My other colleagues may have some other ones, but I would think anything we could do to make government more accessible for young folks and seniors, it would be beneficial for us. Oh, one last question. Is there significantly more costs to residents of the, or tenants of the Portland building today than what their cost was prior to moving back into the Portland building? And if so, what's going to be the impact on ongoing budgets as it relates to that new cost?
The short answer is yes, and you will see it in the city budget office's write-up in terms of some challenges facing the bureaus going forward. My predecessor and I were both very clear with people, and I think I'm confident bureau directors would say this as well, that because we're paying debt service on this project, and we have additional costs in terms of just the way we're managing the building differently than it was managed over the last 30 years, it is more expensive. They were prepared for it, and it's still going to be difficult. And there are trade-offs in terms of this. The most challenging aspect of this modernization that we are doing in terms of the way we approach rental rates is that we're now instituting what's called the downtown blended rate, which means if you are in a city-owned space downtown, you're paying one rate. Now, it has caused debate, particularly among group entities that are in 1900, so the Bureau of Development Services. They will benefit from the Portland building, but most of their day-to-day operations are in the 1900 building. They're now paying a blended rate that will cover all the costs of the downtown facilities, which is good for us long-term that we'll be able to take care of the facilities, but it is an increase. We are working diligently with them to make sure that we manage this over the next several years and services aren't impacted, but you will hear about it. It doesn't apply to everybody because others have facilities outside of the downtown core. It goes to one of the mayor's points around why are we emphasizing still the 1950s model of everybody's got to be downtown. So this is part of our evolution around a long-range facilities plan and where should people be. That being said, we have to take care of the assets that we have downtown, and we have not been doing that very well. So yes, it's more expensive. Again, I would encourage you to make me the messenger on that, because I think that has worked so far, and I think we're just going to need to enforce that discipline. I wanted to make sure, any other questions before we move to the last slide?
Oh, I have
go ahead.
several.
I sensed a waning interest. I made a mistake.
None. I mean,
No, this
you're
is him
becoming
excited.
Look how dynamic Tom is
know,
becoming,
right?
too.
Right.
This is like perking me up. Related to the question that Commissioner Hardesty just asked, are we now capturing enough revenue to actually take care of this building over the long term? We now have a squeaky clean, brand new building, and what I don't want to do is dump the same problem on a future generation that was dumped in our laps. Are we taking care of it, and what is the plan to take care of this facility and maintain it over the long term? And Tom, you'll recall in Treasury, we spent a lot of time on life cycle costs. So what's our plan with regard to the life cycle costs of this building?
That is a fantastic question. We've been working closely with the Budget Office on putting together our 2021 budget for the building, as well as the Fourth Montgomery building that will be coming online next year as well. And there are unknowns as to what it will take to operate the building effectively and efficiently. Due to the fact that the Portland building has a reserve already in place from the old Portland building, the guidance and direction from the CBO's office was to utilize the reserve for this first year to deal with the fluctuations of what this first year brings. And then next year, we will do a new analysis with some actual costs of what it takes to operate the building appropriately, and then be putting that in for the 21-22 budget proposal.
Good.
So we have that flexibility with the Portland
data?
building that a typical new building would not have, because we had existing reserves that were maintained and preserved.
What are you hearing from employees who've moved back into the building? What are they saying about it?
The best gauge is the elevator, because many employees don't know who Krista and I are, our role in the project, and if you just keep your ears open, you hear a lot.
Right.
It varies from, how do you like our new corporate digs? This is great, to it's too bright, which is interesting to me. Yeah,
Too bright,
it's
that's a new one.
interesting.
Okay.
To I love it. To I can now eat in a common gathering space instead of a tiny little, my desk or a tiny little enclosed room. Largely, it's very positive. We are still working through some kinks around every time we move, 158 people into the building each week. The HVAC system needs to be rebalanced. So there are some issues in terms of heating and cooling. All the new technology, people are getting used to it. I would say what we're hearing so far is very positive, and it's still an adjustment for people.
Right.
So we are taking it with a grain of salt. We're going to do a monthly survey to people that they can do anonymously to give us feedback. I would encourage you to ask other directors in your portfolio. They'll probably give you a better sense than I'm giving you, just because, we live in a place where sometimes you don't get the most direct feedback from people.
Terrific, thank
If
you.
I may
add
add
to that?
one other comment
course,
to
Krista.
your sardines question previously. One of the ironic comments I've made is that I am too far from my neighboring coworkers that I can't overhear their conversations anymore and know what's going on. So even though the assigned workspace is smaller,
Right.
it is much more spacious, and they're spaced differently than we previously were. And I think people have been surprised about how open and spacious it does feel.
It's got to be pretty cool to move walls. I remember going to a school where they were able to do that, right? You could make it bigger or smaller based on whatever the project was you were working on. It must be a really cool environment to work in.
Good.
I'm sorry, am I interrupting
not
you?
at all.
I had one more question, and so how many less downtown office buildings will we be renting because we now have this building open?
Good question. You want to take that, Krista?
I'll take part of that question. So we've been able to utilize the fact that we have flexible furniture already and additional space by bringing 3 additional offices into the Portland building that were not part of the plan. Those were decided within the last few months of construction. So OEHR is moving into the Portland building. The Office of Accountable Elections, and
Community
OCT,
Technology.
the Community Technology Office, are all moving into the Portland building. Some of them are already there. And so that is partially due to the flexibility that it was really a matter of moving people around, and we didn't have to do any type of redesign. We're also looking at moving a couple other groups into the Portland building very soon, which will free up space in other buildings. Due to the growth of city employment, I would say we have not eliminated other leases, but we have done is prevented the need for additional outlease space. So our growth has been so much higher than even originally anticipated at the beginning of the Portland building project when we approved space optimization, that we are filling it quite quickly, but we've been able to eliminate the need for finding additional leases.
And what do you anticipate the occupancy rate to be in the Portland building?
It will be able to contain approximately 1,700 employees.
And are you planning to fill it to the gill, or is there a sweet spot?
That is a good question. Over time, we hope that it will be filled. So we have desk space already set up for the 1,700
expansion of some-
employees. So what bureaus have done is created empty workspaces within their work environment. So it won't feel more packed really than it does today on the floors. There will just be less empty workstations.
Cool.
Great. Commissioner Daly, did you have any questions?
I want to close by talking, well, I should wait in the gap for Commissioner Daly, sorry.
All right, go
Okay.
ahead, Tom. Thanks.
Finally, the grand reopening celebration is on the 19th. We know it's
The 18th?
We know it's on all of your employee celebration the 18th. So we're doing tours for all city employees, whether or not they work in the Portland building or not. We want them to see the building, tour the building. On the 19th is the grand reopening for the public. It's on all of your calendars. We are looking forward to having you there. Mayor, you will be speaking. Commissioner Daly, as the Arts Commissioner, will be rededicating Portlandia. I insisted that there be music, so there'll be music throughout the building. I did win on that. I didn't win on everything, but there will be music. There will be tours, trivia, treats, lots of information about the new public artwork, why we named the two event rooms, the Lizzie Weeks room and the Helen Ying room, the recognition for people that haven't been recognized in Portland's history. So it's going to be fun. Please come with your staffs. If you're listening out there, either city employee or member of the public, please come. It's an afternoon event. I want to say 3 o'clock. Am I right about that? 3 to 5, I believe. And then there's an architectural event, March 19th. And then in April, we are going to be featured in Design Week here in Portland as well. So lots of
Sweet.
fun and interesting and deserved honors for the team that has done this great work. So thanks to Kristen and the entire team. If there aren't any other questions, that's what we've got for you. We're happy to do follow-up. I know we have to do some follow-up with Commissioner Hardesty, and happy to do any other follow-up that any other council member needs.
Good. Well, this was helpful, and it puts an end cap on what I think has just been a tremendous project. And I've said this many times, and I'm sure I'll have many other opportunities to say it. I am very, very pleased with the outcome of this project. A lot of people know I'm not a huge fan of the Portland building, and I believe it has been greatly improved.
You mean the exterior?
The what?
You mean the exterior of the building, Mayor? The interior,
No,
we think you're going to love.
I didn't
We
think
you're
much
going
of
to
the
love
interior.
Oh,
I thought, you know, in a city like this, light, openness, an HVAC system that actually functions, those kinds of things, I think were desperately needed. And I think this has just been a tremendous improvement. I think the morale will be much better in the building, and the productivity will be better as well. You built a building for the future, and I'm really appreciative of your hard work. It's been fantastic.
Here, Mayor, I'm sorry, I just thought of one more question. Sure. We used to have childcare in the Portland building, and the new building does not include childcare. Is that going to be an issue for the workers who are moving back into the Portland building who used to utilize that service?
What was decided before the project started was that the existing Portland building childcare would move to another location. And there was an informal agreement that we would work with council to fund a second, so basically double the childcare capacity. After working through the process with the mayor and then the mayor working it through with council, I took the direction to not ask for additional funding for the child care center build out in the existing Portland building. So we still have the child care that was relocated. Do I think it's a long-term issue for city employees? Absolutely, which is why, as a part of the direction that council gave me around not doing the build out of the new space, to do the work around what should we be doing with city employees has started in earnest with the affinity group. They have made a whole series of policy recommendations, as I think it's called PDX Urban Mamas, around what we should be doing, including augmenting and strengthening our remote work policy. But there are several things that the group has asked us to consider proposing to council, and we're going to work through that. As I think I've said individually and to the group before, the fact that we have been so downtown-centric with the subsidy is an issue, and the city budget office did a great job raising that last year in a review. that we need to think about and approach whether or not you work at Mount Scott or Disham Community Center or somewhere on the west side, not in the downtown. If you're a city employee, what can you expect? The pressures on people are acute and getting worse as working parents. And the fact is, if you work downtown, you're actually, generally speaking, a higher paid employee than you are in different parts of the city. So the short of it is we have work to do in proposing what we should do citywide. But yes, I think it'll continue to be a pressure on city employees.
Thank you for that. And I know it's a hard issue because even when we had it in the Portland building, it was way expensive, right? And even if it was subsidized, it was really, really expensive. So we've got to do better on that. So I appreciate the work. And congratulations. I think this is absolutely a model of being thoughtful at the front end and really being clear about what you wanted to achieve, and then having an oversight committee that held you accountable for those outcomes. So congratulations. Great work.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. We are adjourned.
Thank you.